We're going to talk briefly about configuring this device as a BACnet router. In its simplest form, there's really not much to it. The router itself needs to be defined as a BACnet device on the BACnet network, which means give it a device instance, and under the System tab, System Network, you give the router an IP address, of course, and then back over here on the BACnet tab, need to give it a MAC address, MSDP MAC address, and select baud rate, and the rest of these parameters are basically not going to hold you up in terms of functioning as a router. You can, certainly optionally give it well, it's not optional to give it an object name. It's optional to change it, I suppose, from what it defaults to. And then under router, give it an IP network number and an MSTP network number. These boxes will default to being enable routing, enable route learning. Now, once the device has been running for a little while, if there are other things on the network, it is going to discover other networks that you have on the network, other BACnet networks that are physically accessible to this router, I should say. And the local info here is not something that is provided over the network by other routers when they respond to who is router. Where that comes into play is if you configure routes, you have the option of entering some local info just for your own documentation purposes. Now, in this case, we have not manually configured any routes because we have allowed all of them to be learned. If you want to manually configure them, you would select local port, the remote network number accessible on that port, and that router's address, and then update. And then, of course, go to the file manager and save your configuration changes. We also have the option using the slave proxy. If you have some MSDP devices that are slave devices, in other words, they do not know how to respond to who is and do not pass the token, this is where you can come and have the router answer to who is on behalf of those slave devices. Basically, you set that up by entering MAC address, device instance, and some local device info, and it will then begin to query that slave and fill in max APDU and vendor so that the router can begin to respond to who is on behalf of those slave devices. And the other thing that you have the option of using, of course, is BBMD. This is where you would come to set that up, enable BBMD, and then which of these other parameters you choose to use depends on how you're going to use the BBMD. There's a great deal of additional information about using BBMD in the user guide.